Hello, this is Dr. Eric Bricker, and thank you for watching A Healthcare Z. Today's topic is market segmentation for healthcare entrepreneurs. Now, today's video about businesses starting in healthcare relates to healthcare utilization and customers, because in order for a business to be successful, it has to have product market fit. And many entrepreneurs that I have seen have really a lack of understanding when it comes to the market, when it comes to the customers. And so that's what we're going to go over today. Specifically, who are the high healthcare utilizers? Who's sick, okay? Versus who are the low healthcare utilizers? Who's really not sick, okay? High healthcare utilizers tend to be old. They tend to be obese. They tend to be uneducated. They tend to be poor. Now, people who don't use a lot of healthcare tend to be younger, they tend to be thinner, they tend to be educated, and they tend to be richer. Now, there is a very complex interplay here between what makes you sick and a high healthcare utilizer and what makes you a low healthcare utilizer and healthier. And there's cause and effect on both sides. In other words, there's things about being obese and uneducated and poor that cause you to be unhealthy, but also poor health then contribute to being obese and uneducated and poor as well. So there's like back and forth between the two. It's an incredibly complicated topic. That is not the point for the video today. The point is that if you are starting a company in healthcare to address healthcare utilization, healthcare cost, healthcare quality, then you need to understand that your customers in general are going to be old, obese, uneducated, and poor. Okay, what's some proof for that? Okay, in regards to age, the elderly have about 7 visits per year, whereas younger people only have like 3.5 visits per year, right? So that they just go to the doctor twice as often. Obese people use primary care services 80 to 102% more than non-obese people, and that holds true for specialists as well. It's like 20 to 80% higher for people who are obese using specialists versus people who are normal weight using specialists. Okay, next up, people who are uneducated, in other words, the prevalence of diabetes, if you don't have a high school diploma, is 15%. Whereas for people who have graduated college, it's less than half as much. It's only 7%. Okay, now, in a study that was done for both Los Angeles and Milwaukee, they looked at wealthy versus poor zip codes, and they found that people in poor zip codes had 35% higher hospital utilization than people in wealthy zip codes. So, you don't even need these statistics. There's a very simple experiment that you can do. Go to your local hospital, and most hospitals have like medical office buildings like right next door. Just go into the lobby of that medical office building, sit down, and look at who comes through the door. And in general, the people going to that medical office building for healthcare services are older people, obese people, uneducated people, and poorer people. I'm not trying to be pejorative at all, but we need to understand, if we're going to work with high healthcare utilizing people, if we're going to work with people that are sick, then we need to understand who they are, and that's super important, because entrepreneurs and venture capitalists, what are they? They tend to be younger, thinner, educated, and richer people. So there tends to be this complete lack of understanding where they think that the customers are going to be like them. And they're not going to be like them at all. Again, listen, many of these people are victims. Many of these people make poor choices. Like, it's a super complicated topic. I'm not going to cover that today, okay? However, let's move on to then how this relates to entrepreneurship and businesses, specifically looking at 2 separate companies. One is Innovage, which works with the high group, and one is Teladoc, which tends to work with the low group. Okay, now, what does Innovage do? They do care for people who are both eligible for Medicare and Medicaid. Okay, so they're old and they're poor. And these are people that generally would have been in a nursing home, but they take care of them at home. They do the doctor visits, they coordinate their care, they address transportation needs, a whole bunch of social determinants of health. Now, they have about 5,000 members. They do this for about 5,000 people. they're a publicly traded company. They just had an IPO, like every other healthcare company out there, right? They're valued at 2.4 billion people. Excuse me, $2.4 billion. Now, the exact opposite of that is Teladoc. Teladoc works through employers. Like, people that work, in general, are younger, thinner, more educated, and they're wealthier, right? So, obviously there's a spectrum, but I'm just saying it in general. All right. Teladoc has 43 million members, as opposed to the 5,000 for Innovage. Okay, Teladoc's valuation is $30 billion. That's their market capitalization. Okay, but if you take their valuation, their market capitalization, and divide it by the number of members, you see that Innovage is worth $480,000 per member, whereas Teladoc is worth only $698 per member. They're totally different businesses. They're totally different in terms of the value that they can create for each individual person. Obviously, Innovage is creating much more value per person if they're able to extract $480,000 of company valuation per person, whereas Teladoc is not providing. The vast majority of the services that Teladoc provides for people are things like antibiotics for upper respiratory tract infections, and antibiotics for urinary tract infections, and antifungals for yeast infections. It's great. It provides value. It makes things much more convenient in terms of accessing care, but it's accessing care for not complicated, not expensive stuff. And as a result, they can only extract $698 per member in terms of their company valuation. So it's a totally different business. I'm not saying that one is better or worse than the other. My point is, don't get confused and try to do both. Okay? If you're like, we're going to be a healthcare startup that's going to improve quality and decrease costs and dramatically increase access to care, and we're going to be incredibly impactful in the lives of our members, then you need to follow the Innovage model. And if you are like, well, we're going to sell to employers and we want to have a whole bunch of members, right? Well, that's the Teladoc model. That can be a value too. But just know, like, don't try to provide life-changing value if you're going the Teladoc route. And don't try to sign up 43 million members if you're going the Innovage route. Okay? And I'm not going to name names, but I see companies and entrepreneurs and venture capitalists making this mistake all the time. And it needs to stop. And it needs to stop because it is a huge waste of time and money. Billions and billions of dollars and countless hours are spent by people who do not have the basic understanding of these two different ways of going about it. And so that's my point for today. Thank you for watching A Healthcare Z.